The room was stifling, filled with sterile silence, save for the clatter of keyboards and the occasional murmur of a colleague. Marissa sat at the back of the conference room, her hands clenched around a notepad. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, hoping to finally be seen, to have her voice heard. But as the project she had worked on tirelessly for months was presented, she watched in horror as another team member took credit for all of her ideas. Her heart sank, the knot in her stomach twisting painfully as the words, "Excellent work, Jason," echoed in her ears. The betrayal hit her like a slap, and she fought to keep her composure. Her mind raced. This was it, the final straw. Was she invisible? Had she worked this hard only to be brushed aside again? A deep sense of helplessness washed over her, but beneath it, a flicker of anger sparked. For the first time, she didn't just feel overlooked. She felt enraged. This moment, this betrayal, was the catalyst. No more. Something had to change. Marissa walked back to her desk, the sounds of the office blurring as her mind raced. She had been here before, this feeling of being invisible, overlooked, dismissed. But this time, something was different. She couldn't let it slide, not again. She sat down, feeling the weight of the betrayal sink into her chest. She had always worked so hard, putting in the hours, refining her ideas, only for someone else to reap the rewards. And for what? To stay in the background forever unnoticed. Not anymore. She couldn't keep living like this, hiding in the shadows. She needed to take control, to be seen, to prove that she was worthy of recognition. But where to begin? The journey ahead seemed daunting, like an uphill battle. Yet, deep down, Marissa knew she had no choice. She had to fight for herself, not just for the promotion she deserved, but for her very dignity. The road would be hard, but she was determined to walk it, no matter the cost. Marissa knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. That's when she reached out to Mark, her colleague and occasional confidant. He had always been straightforward, blunt, and honest, even when it wasn't easy to hear. They had worked side by side for years, but their relationship had remained mostly professional. Until now. He had noticed her struggle, seen the way she had shrunk into the background, and he knew it was time for her to face the truth. "Marissa," he said, leaning in, "you're not going to get anywhere by sitting in the shadows. The world doesn't reward the quiet ones, not unless they speak up." The words hit her like a cold splash of water. She had always hoped that if she worked hard enough, the recognition would come. But he was right. She had to make it happen herself, or it would never come. Her hesitation began to melt away as she realized that she had to push herself out of the corner she had boxed herself into. Later that day, Marissa sat alone in her apartment, her mind replaying everything Mark had said. The air felt heavy, but she couldn't shake the weight of the decision before her. She could keep quiet, stay in her corner, and continue being overlooked. Or she could step into the light, take a risk, and demand what she had always deserved. The decision felt impossible, but the thought of another day spent hiding in the shadows was unbearable. She stood up from the couch, pacing the room as she wrestled with her doubts. "Do I really have the courage?" she whispered to herself. But deep down she knew that the only way out was through. She wasn't sure what would happen, but she had made up her mind. It was time to fight for herself. And if she failed, at least she would fail on her own terms. The next morning, Marissa stood in front of the mirror, looking at the woman staring back at her. The reflection was the same, but the resolve was different. Today was the day she would take the first step. She put on her best outfit, the one she reserved for important meetings, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a purpose. She grabbed her laptop bag and headed out the door, her heart pounding with anticipation. She didn't know what today would bring, but she wasn't going to let fear stop her. She would find a way to make her mark, even if it meant taking risks she had never dared to before. The world had kept her quiet for too long, but not anymore. She was ready to make her voice heard. The next few days dragged like heavy weights on Marissa's shoulders. The anger that had sparked inside her was now accompanied by fear. What if she had ruined everything by showing emotion in the meeting? She replayed the moment again and again, questioning whether her silence had been safer after all. Each colleague's passing glance felt sharper, as if they were secretly judging her, though most hardly noticed her presence. She wanted to stand tall, to prove herself, but self-doubt whispered that she had overstepped. Sitting alone at her desk, she felt the battle raging within her, a tug of war between the quiet woman she had always been and the stronger one she was trying to become. And as the office hummed around her, she realized that change demanded pain, and pain was exactly where she was living now. Mark noticed her withdrawn state during their lunch break. He pushed his tray aside and leaned forward. "You're thinking too much," he said flatly, eyes narrowing with impatience. Marissa's shoulders tensed, but she didn't reply. He sighed, shaking his head. "You can't wait for recognition. You have to claim it. Do you want to keep being invisible?" His blunt words stung, but they rang true. Marissa hated how he could see through her defenses. She wanted to argue, to say she was trying, but deep down she knew he was right. Mark's cynicism was hard to swallow, but it carried wisdom she needed. She stared at him, torn between frustration and gratitude. This wasn't encouragement, it was a challenge. A dare to stop shrinking. For the first time, she wondered if the version of herself she clung to was already gone. Later that week, Marissa's manager announced an upcoming presentation to a major executive. Volunteers were asked to pitch ideas. Her pulse quickened at the mention. This was exactly the kind of chance she had been waiting for. But the thought of speaking before the leadership team felt suffocating. Her palms grew clammy as she imagined their cold stares, their quick judgments. Jason immediately raised his hand, of course, smirking as if the role was made for him. Marissa felt her throat tighten. Should she try? Could she dare? The quiet voice inside her warned against humiliation, but another voice whispered louder. This was her moment. If she stayed silent, nothing would ever change. Her chest rose with a shaky breath. She had to decide. That night, Marissa sat at her kitchen table, papers scattered, laptop glowing with open slides. She stared at the blank screen for hours, paralyzed by doubt. Every idea seemed too weak, too obvious, too easy to dismiss. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. "You have to make them listen," she whispered to herself, pushing through the hesitation. Slowly, words began to appear, rough at first, but growing stronger as she typed. Each sentence was a battle, each idea a small victory. The silence of her apartment pressed in on her, broken only by the sound of keys clicking. She didn't know if her work would be enough, but she knew she had to try. For once, she wasn't preparing to stay hidden. She was preparing to be seen. As fatigue set in, Marissa's mind drifted back to her childhood. She saw herself at 10 years old, standing in her school auditorium, holding a certificate she had earned. Her father's voice echoed from memory, sharp and dismissive. "Don't get ahead of yourself. You're not that special." The sting of those words had never left her. They had shaped her, carved her into someone afraid to rise too high. The memory hit her chest like a blow, but instead of shrinking, she clenched her jaw. That voice didn't define her anymore. She whispered into the quiet, "I am enough." The past still hurt, but it fueled her now. With new fire in her eyes, she leaned toward the laptop, determined to finish what she had started. The day of the presentation arrived, and Marissa's nerves were like a storm inside her chest. She walked into the sleek conference room, her laptop balanced carefully in her trembling hands. The executives sat around the table, their expressions unreadable, their pens tapping faintly against polished surfaces. She began speaking, her voice steady at first, but faltering as the weight of their eyes pressed down on her. The slides clicked by, but her words felt flat, lifeless compared to the energy Jason always seemed to command. A cold silence lingered when she finished, broken only by a dismissive remark from her manager. "Thank you, Marissa. We'll circle back." That phrase, so casual, so empty, landed like a stone in her stomach. As she walked back to her seat, she knew this had been her chance, and she had let it slip through her trembling fingers. That night, Marissa sat curled on her couch, lights off, the glow of her muted phone the only illumination. Her chest felt heavy, her breaths shallow, as she replayed the presentation over and over. Every stutter, every nervous glance haunted her like a cruel echo. "You'll never be enough," the old voice whispered again in her mind. She pulled her knees close, tears spilling silently as the room pressed in on her. Doubt spread through her veins like poison, convincing her she was foolish to think she could rise. The anger she once felt seemed distant now, replaced by a crushing shame that pinned her to the silence of her apartment. She wanted to disappear, to escape the weight of her failure, but the ache in her chest reminded her she was trapped in her own skin. The next day, Mark found her slumped at her desk, avoiding eye contact with everyone. He pulled a chair beside her and spoke without ceremony. "You're doing it again," he said flatly. Marissa flinched, not wanting to face him, but he pressed on. "You're spiraling, and for what? One bad presentation? Everyone fails, Marissa. The difference is what you do next." She shook her head, voice low. "You didn't hear them. I could feel them judging." Mark's eyes hardened. Of course they judged. They always judge. But you can either let it break you, or you can use it. Stop waiting for someone to save you. His words were sharp, but they cut through her fog like a blade. For the first time in days, she lifted her head, meeting his gaze. Hope flickered briefly after her talk with Mark, but it was quickly extinguished. Later that afternoon, Marissa overheard her manager reassigning her project to Jason. "He'll polish it better," the manager said casually, not even glancing in her direction. The words burned hotter than fire, her stomach churning as if the floor had collapsed beneath her. All the nights she had sacrificed, all the hours she poured into the work, dismissed with a single breath. She wanted to scream, but her throat felt locked shut. Instead, she sat frozen, listening to Jason's smug, "I'll take it from here," echo across the office like a victory call. For Marissa, it wasn't just about the project. It was about being erased, and in that moment she felt more invisible than ever. That evening, Marissa walked aimlessly through the city streets, neon lights flickering against wet pavement after a light rain. Her thoughts spiraled: failure, betrayal, invisibility. Yet, as the noise of traffic and chatter surrounded her, something within shifted. She realized she was tired of letting others define her worth, tired of shrinking to fit the mold others built for. If the world wasn't going to hand her a place, she would carve her own. Standing at the edge of a busy crosswalk, the cool air biting her cheeks, she whispered, "No more." The words were small, but they carried weight. They weren't about proving herself to Jason, her manager, or even her past. They were about reclaiming herself. And that, she thought, was the beginning of everything. The office buzzed with its usual noise, but Marissa barely noticed until she overheard two colleagues whispering about a client review meeting. Her ears sharpened as she caught the words, "They're looking for fresh proposals. Executives want new perspectives." Her heart skipped. This wasn't a scheduled event she knew of. Clearly, it hadn't been announced to everyone. She felt the air shift inside her chest. Maybe this was it, an opening not yet tainted by office politics. She hesitated, knowing it was risky to involve herself without an invitation, But what did she have to lose? Every official opportunity had already been stolen from her. If she could get her ideas into that room, maybe she could finally break free from Jason's shadow. For the first time, hope flickered like a small flame she dared not smother. Later, in the quiet of her apartment, Marissa sat at her desk, staring at the glow of her laptop. The whispered conversation replayed in her mind. Should she dare? If she presented her ideas at that client meeting without being asked, she could be ridiculed, or worse, punished. Yet the thought of staying silent felt like betrayal to herself. Her fingers tapped the desk nervously, her pulse echoing in her ears. The air smelled faintly of coffee and ink from her scattered notes. She closed her eyes and whispered, "If not now, then never." The fear was still there, but it felt smaller than before. What loomed larger was the possibility of claiming the voice she had buried for so long. The next day, she confided in Mark. His reaction was blunt as ever. "So do it," he said, crossing his arms, unimpressed by her hesitation. Marissa frowned. "What if I fail again? What if I look foolish?" His gaze sharpened. "Then you fail. But at least it's on your terms. You're waiting for a perfect moment that doesn't exist. Stop asking for permission to be who you already are." The words hit her with the weight of a truth she had avoided. She realized Mark wasn't just giving advice, he was challenging her to stop running from herself. She felt the sting of his bluntness, but also the strange comfort of knowing someone believed she could handle the truth. That evening, Marissa approached her notes with a new fire. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, sharper and faster than before. The ideas flowed with clarity, fueled by anger, memory, and determination. She wasn't writing to please anyone anymore. She was writing to prove to herself that her voice mattered. The slides took shape with bold statements and clean designs. For the first time, she wasn't hiding behind safe ideas. She was willing to risk being seen fully. The night stretched long, but the exhaustion didn't scare her. Each word on the screen felt like a step closer to reclaiming the pieces of herself she had buried. Next morning, Marissa opened her email and froze. Her draft proposal slides had been accessed and altered. Ideas twisted, points removed. Someone had tampered with her work. Fury boiled in her chest. But as she scrolled, she saw Jason's name in the access log. Her breath caught. It wasn't paranoia. It was sabotage. He had been undermining her, ensuring she always seemed a step behind. For a moment, her knees went weak, but then anger burned hotter than fear. This wasn't just about a project anymore. It was about refusing to be erased. Her chest lifted with a deep breath as she whispered, "Not this time." The fire inside her no longer flickered. It roared. The day of the client meeting arrived, and Marissa could feel the weight of every second as she stood in front of the team, holding her breath. She had never been more prepared, and yet her heart raced. The room was filled with towering figures, executives she had always feared, but now her hands weren't trembling. She moved confidently to the projector, her slides flashing up behind her like a vivid reflection of everything she had worked for. Her words came out clear and steady, every idea sharp, cutting through the room like a weapon. She could feel the eyes of the executives, scanning, analyzing her every word. But this time, it didn't matter. She wasn't there to seek approval. She was there to show them what she was capable of. This was her moment. The world had underestimated her for too long, but she would no longer stay invisible. Halfway through her presentation, the pressure began to mount. The silence from the executives felt too heavy, too suffocating. She felt a flicker of doubt creep into her mind. Was this enough? Did she really have what it took to break through? But as the first few questions came, they weren't dismissive. They were thoughtful, probing. Instead of sinking into her old patterns of self-doubt, she responded with clarity, finding strength in the very challenge she once feared. It was then she realized, no matter the outcome of this meeting, she had already won. The confidence she was showing now, this was the beginning of her transformation. She could never go back to the woman she once was. The meeting went better than expected. The executives were impressed by her work. But when the meeting ended, Marissa found herself face to face with Jason in the hallway. He gave her a tight, false smile. "Nice presentation," he said, his tone dripping with insincerity. "But don't get too comfortable. You're still in my shadow." Marissa's blood boiled, but she kept her composure. She had been overlooked, belittled for too long, and now she wasn't afraid. "Not anymore," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. This wasn't about him. It was about her, and she had no intention of hiding any longer. His smirk faltered, and for a brief moment, Marissa could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. She had finally become the woman she was meant to be. A few days later, Marissa stood in front of her computer, her heart pounding as she clicked the email that would reveal the decision. The words on the screen, "Congratulations, we are pleased to offer you the promotion," flashed brightly in her vision. She sat back in her chair, breathing deeply, allowing herself a moment to process. This was it. All the years of struggling, fighting for recognition had led her here. She wasn't just given the promotion because of her hard work. She had earned it because she had finally found the courage to step up, to confront her fears, and to take what was rightfully hers. As she looked out the window, the city stretching out before her, she knew this was only the beginning. Her journey of transformation had only just started. The final test came unexpectedly when Marissa saw her father in the office lobby. He was visiting the company for a business meeting, and their eyes met across the room. She hadn't seen him in years. His expression was as cold and critical as she remembered, his gaze dismissive. She felt the old fears creeping back. Was she enough for him now? But instead of shrinking, she stood tall. She walked up to him, her posture unwavering. "I'm not that little girl anymore," she said, voice steady and strong. His eyes softened, but there was no apology, no recognition. And that was okay. Marissa didn't need it. She was finally free of his judgments. And with that, she felt an immense weight lift from her shoulders. The days following her promotion were a blur of meetings, emails, and new responsibilities. But through it all, Marissa took a step back each night to reflect. She thought about the woman she had once been. The woman who hid in the shadows, who never thought she could be enough. Now, as she looked at herself in the mirror, there was a quiet strength behind her eyes. She wasn't just doing this for the promotion or for the recognition. She was doing it for herself. Marissa had reclaimed her power, but she knew this was just the beginning. Every day was a new challenge, a new opportunity to continue growing, to push past the doubts that had once held her back. And with each victory, big or small, she was reminded that this was the life she had fought for. Marissa walked into the meeting room, the team already gathered around the table. The room was quieter than usual, a sense of anticipation in the air. As she sat down, the weight of her new role pressed on her shoulders, but she wasn't afraid. She felt ready. Today, she wasn't just a participant in the meeting. She was a leader. When it was her turn to speak, her voice was steady and confident. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. She already had. The team listened, engaged with her ideas, and she knew they saw her as an equal. The tension she had felt for so long, the insecurity that once plagued her, had lifted. She wasn't just working alongside them, she was leading them. That evening, Marissa sat on her balcony, the city lights twinkling below. She had earned everything she now had. But there was no feeling of arrogance, only a quiet sense of peace. The road to this moment had been long and full of obstacles, but she had overcome them all. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to simply be still. There was no need to rush forward to prove herself further. She had arrived. The world wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But in this moment, Marissa understood something fundamental. She was enough. This wasn't the end, but it was a pause a brief moment to savor the triumph. The following week, Marissa received an email from her manager with an invitation to a leadership retreat. It wasn't just for the top executives, it was for the emerging leaders in the company. As she read the email, a quiet smile spread across her face. She had done it, not through grand gestures or desperate attempts to be noticed, but through persistence, courage, and the willingness to confront her fears. This opportunity was a sign of her transformation. She didn't need to prove her worth anymore. She was now in a position to help others see their potential as well. This wasn't just about her. It was about creating a path for others who felt overlooked, like she once had. Marissa walked into her office one morning, greeted by her colleagues. They no longer saw her as just another team member. She had become a mentor, someone they looked to for guidance. It felt different this time. There was no need to seek validation. She was already enough. As she sat down to begin her day, her phone buzzed with a message from Mark. "You did it," she smiled, knowing that he had been right all along. She wasn't just working to make a name for herself anymore. She was working to lift others up. Her journey wasn't over, but she had finally embraced who she was meant to be. And that was a legacy worth leaving behind. Marissa stood at the podium in front of a room full of young professionals. She could feel the energy in the room, eager, hungry for guidance. She hadn't realized until now how far she had come from the quiet, insecure woman who once hid in the shadows. This was her moment, not just to speak, but to lead. She spoke about the journey, how every setback had been an opportunity to grow, how every fear had been a challenge to overcome. Her voice was strong, clear, and filled with purpose. As she finished, the room erupted into applause. She wasn't just respected for her accomplishments, she was revered for her resilience, her willingness to face the hardest moments of her life. The applause wasn't just for what she had achieved, it was for what she had become. Later that evening, Marissa sat alone in her office, the city lights flickering below. The adrenaline of the day had worn off, leaving a sense of quiet contentment. She leaned back in her chair, reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. The road to this point had been long, filled with fear and doubt, but now she could finally see how those moments had shaped her. For the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. There was no rush to prove herself, no anxiety gnawing at her. She had made it, not by conforming to others' expectations, but by embracing her own worth. The journey wasn't over, but she had found a place to stand where she could breathe, where she could be fully herself. Marissa's next challenge came from within her team. A young woman just starting her career came to her office one afternoon. "I've been watching you," she said, her voice nervous. "You don't hide. You speak up." Marissa smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "That's what you need to do," she replied softly. "Don't wait for permission. Speak up. Your voice matters." The young woman left, visibly empowered, and Marissa couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment that was deeper than any promotion or recognition. She was passing the torch now, not by being the loudest voice, but by showing others that their voices mattered too. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about empowering others to find their strength. Marissa walked down the hallway toward the boardroom. Today was another meeting, another decision to be made, but as she approached the door, she felt a sense of calm. She wasn't nervous anymore. She didn't feel the weight of others' judgments pressing down on her. The silence of the hallway was a comfort, a reminder of how far she had come. She had transformed from a woman who feared being overlooked to a leader who knew her own worth. And with every step she took, that quiet confidence grew stronger. As she entered the room, the team greeted her with respect. She didn't need to prove anything. She was already there. The final moment came in the form of a quiet reflection. Just before the sun dipped below the horizon, Marissa stood on the balcony of her apartment looking out over the city. Her journey had been long and full of challenges, but she had emerged stronger, more herself than she had ever been. She thought back to the woman she had once been, the one who hid, the one who doubted her worth. That woman was gone now. The city spread out before her, a symbol of the possibilities she had yet to explore. She had no more fear of the future, no more doubt. For the first time, she truly understood that the power to shape her life had always been within her.